Chapter 21, Section 5, Modernists and Traditionalists Clash Over Evolution. 1925, Dayton, Tennessee was a sleepy town of almost 2,000 people, plus a free-thinking New York transplant named George Rapalje. That year, the state legislature passed a law making it illegal for a public school to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible. While chatting with friends one day, Rapalje mentioned an offer by the American Civil Liberties Union to defend any teacher who would test the law. Why not find one right here, he suggested. A trial would show how foolish the law was. It would also attract national attention to Dayton. One of his friends knew just such a man for the job. A young science teacher named John Scopes, who would be willing to teach a lesson on evolution, and so the stage was set for a dramatic contest between modernists and traditionalists over the place of science and religion in public schools. The modernist perspective. Science shows how nature works. Like many modernists, Rapalje looked to science, not the Bible, to explain how the physical world worked. Scientists accepted as true only facts and theories that could be tested and supported with evidence drawn from nature. By the 1920s, people could see the wonders of modern science every time they turned on an electric light, listened to the radio, or visited their doctors. One of the most controversial scientific ideas of that time was the British naturalist Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. Darwin theorized that all plants and animals, including humans, had evolved from simpler forms of life. The evolution of one species from another took place over thousands or millions of years. It worked through a process he called natural selection. Others called it survival of the fittest. In this process, species that make favorable adaptations to their environment are more likely to survive than those that do not. As favorable adaptations pile up, new species evolve from old ones. In such a way, Darwin argued, human beings had evolved from apes. Modernists embraced the concepts of evolution and natural selection. Rather than choosing between science and religion, they believed that both ways of looking at the world could coexist. The day is past, declared a New York City preacher, when you can ask thoughtful men to hold religion in one compartment of their minds and their modern worldview in another. By the 1920s, the theory of evolution was regularly taught in schools. The traditionalist perspective. The Bible is the Word of God. Traditionalists were more likely to see science and religion in conflict. This was especially true of Christian fundamentalists, who believed the Bible was the literal Word of God. They rejected the theory of evolution because it conflicted with creationism, the belief that God created the universe as described in the Bible. During the early 1920s, fundamentalists vigorously campaigned to ban the teaching of evolution in public schools. They found a champion in William Jennings Bryan. A spellbinding speaker, Bryan had played a major role in American politics for 30 years. He had run for president 3 times and served as Secretary of State under President Woodrow Wilson. Bryan toured the country, charging that modernists had taken the Lord away from the schools. Bryan had 2 reasons for taking up the creationist cause. The first was his deeply held Christian faith. The second was his fear that teaching evolution could lead young people to accept social Darwinism. This is the belief that, as in nature, only the fittest members of society will survive. Social Darwinism had been used to justify imperialism on the grounds that the fittest or most powerful peoples should rule the less powerful. It had also been used to promote eugenics, or the idea that the human species should be improved by forbidding people with characteristics judged undesirable to reproduce. Bryan saw such views as a threat to the poor and weak. He worried that widespread acceptance of social Darwinism and eugenics would weaken the cause of democracy and strengthen class pride and power of wealth. Creationism versus evolution in Tennessee. Tennessee became the first state to enact a law banning the teaching of evolution in public schools. The law might not have caused a nationwide stir if Rapalje had not decided to contest it. He sent a student to pull Scopes off a tennis court and said, "John, we've been arguing, and I said that nobody could teach biology without teaching evolution." Scopes not only agreed, but also volunteered to teach a lesson on evolution the next day. Rapalje then asked the American Civil Liberties Union to defend the young science teacher before going to the police and having Scopes arrested. The Scopes trial, which began on July 10, 1925, brought far more attention to Dayton than Rapalje had hoped. Bryan offered to represent the state of Tennessee. Scopes supporters added high-powered lawyers Clarence Darrow to the defense team. Although Darrow had supported Bryan for president, he disagreed with him about religion and agreed to defend Scopes for free. Some 200 reporters arrived in Dayton as the trial opened. along with tourists and hawkers selling toy monkeys. The whole country was following this contest between creationism and evolution. In their opening statements, the opposing lawyers recognized that the issue to be decided was much more than whether Scopes had broken the law. If evolution wins, Bryan had warned, Christianity goes. Darrow argued, Scopes isn't on trial, civilization is on trial. To make his point, Darrow had brought a variety of experts to Dayton to testify against the Tennessee law. After hearing one of them, the judge refused to let the rest testify because what they had to say was not relevant to the guilt or innocence of the science teacher. For a moment, it looked like Darrow had no defense. Then he surprised everyone by calling Bryan to the stand as an expert on the Bible. Do you claim that everything in the Bible should be literally interpreted? Darrow asked. Bryan answered, I believe everything in the Bible should be accepted as it is given there. However, when asked if Earth had been created in 6 days, Bryan answered, I do not think it means necessarily a 24-hour day. Creation, he added, might have continued for millions of years. Darrow had tricked Bryan, the fundamentalist champion, into admitting that he himself did not always interpret each and every word in the Bible as the literal truth. When the trial ended, it took the jury fewer than 10 minutes to find Scopes guilty, whereupon the judge fined him $100. A year later, the Tennessee Supreme Court overturned the conviction because the judge, not the jury, had imposed the fine. Chapter